As we grow, evolve, and explore ourselves, so too does the language we use. My name is Spencer Gillespie, and I am an artist, educator, and advocate. My work balances an emphasis on material exploration with personal expression. Utilizing overtly recognizable materials such as cardboard, packaging, or printed matter, and painting techniques such as color, impasto, and expressive mark making, I extend the conventions of painting to include a commentary on the act of creation. My artwork are artifacts as much as images, and act as a ground upon which I search for an understanding of the emotional and psychological state of the art object. I explore the mental processes by which we relate ourselves to a surface, drawing upon the associations we carry with types of materials, gestures, and strata. Reclaiming the remnants of materials in my studio for self-portraits and journal entries is a way for me to make sense of my decision-making. I embrace and react to risk with conscious response while relying on my formal training for aesthetic compositions. Formally impactful, my work engages the expression of emotion through a language of color, physicality, and text. My work functions as artifacts or evidence, which embody not only the process of creation, but my mindset while making as well. As a transgender individual, it has been incredibly important for me to place myself within this world. I not only journal or record, but channel my immediate mental state into the act of mark making. I believe it is crucial to question, cultivate, and reflect upon our lived experiences in order to enrich ourselves as human beings. The materials brought to the studio live in a constant state of evolution and become evidence of its own lived experience within it.
Every moment of the day, I find myself distancing from others, ignoring my awareness, understanding emotions and reactions. Putting up a boundary to protect myself from getting hurt again. It pains me for how long it took me to recognize the suppression of a bus accident during my youth. I became aware through the act of walking. I acknowledge the mundane act of walking because it was almost taken from me. I found myself using walking as a way to socially withdraw to cope. It became a tool for me to ground my thoughts in a personal and embodied experience that forms a relationship to my surroundings. The accident shifted my perception on how I view the world and how walking became my artistic strategy of creating the world as well as being in it. I noticed this high sensitivity towards broken or dejected objects. The act of me picking up the broken objects became a form of being there in those places. The objects that I picked up can be very similar or parallel to my body after that accident. I see myself as broken, abnormal, dejected. Not only has the accident affected me psychologically, but I have physical reminders that haunt me still. These reminders can be seen through the objects that I pick up or thoughts on my walk. Their broken quality can rest safely within my studio. By bringing them into my studio first and treating them with small artistic gestures, or simply articulating them into a space or into a combination with another equally dejective object. The way I observe is always guided by the way I orient my attention, picking up broken materials, and it ends up in the studio, and then in the gallery space as an act of reflection, including self-reflection towards my accident. I strive for a sense of poetry in humble materials by creating works that exist in the present moment, reflect the fragility of the world, and allow for individual experience and perceptions.
My fibers practice focuses around weaving, and my work oftentimes is centered around the idea of rites of passage and human development. So I find that in my work I'm talking about kind of a broader aspect of rites of passage that everybody can relate to in American culture, but also I'm talking about my own experiences within that, my own personal growth and, I guess, trauma in some ways in some of my works. My personal gravitation towards weaving has to do with the ability to make cloth out of unconventional materials. So I find that's where I'm really interested in using fibers to my advantage, is kind of forcing materials into the same scape and making it into a cloth so that I can show that cloth. And it's a way for me to, in some ways, do material collages where I'm taking materials that reference really specific parts of rites of passage. So for example, in a piece that I made about prom, I used prom dresses as a way to reference those specific rites of passage. Within my work, I find that I often gravitate towards the contrast or the comparison between soft and more fluffy materials, or more like yarn materials, while also using really shiny or harder materials. So in some of my work, you'll see I'm using porcelain beads or something like that, kind of as a shinier material against yarn. In my work, I'm also using a very strict color palette of really bright and poppy tones. I'm very interested in using those as a way to reference youthfulness, but also referencing and using the gradient as a way to talk about transition or change in a person's life. Thrifting is a big part of my practice also, so finding materials in unlikely places. I kind of think of thrift stores as like the consumer culture leveling ground, because I feel like whenever you walk into a lot of stores, you'll find that it's very curated on what you're buying and the things that you see, while a thrift store is kind of just like this chaotic mess where things just come to live eventually, and I find them to be very fascinating, and I find a lot of the materials that I use in thrift stores. The uncanny is a big part of my work also, so thinking of making the familiar unfamiliar. I often am talking about experiences that happened to me, but also talking about family dynamics. So I grew up with two older sisters who are 10 and 15 years older than me. My two sisters kind of function as like babysitters in some ways. So I grew up watching and listening to a lot of the things that they watched and listened to. So that gave me a sense of anemoia, which is nostalgia for a time you've never lived. And I have a very strong interest in 1980s pop culture, very specifically the coming-of-age films that came from that time period. A lot of John Hughes films centered around coming of age and kind of those rites of passages that I'm talking about in my work. My practice is also very cathartic. It's a way for me to kind of dispel certain things about my experiences, but also it's kind of a way to cleanse them of myself. And I find that a lot of times I hope that the viewer also gets the cathartic experience by viewing my work and can relate to some of the experiences I've been through. And yeah, that's my studio practice. Thanks.
My name is Johanna Guilfoyle. I'm a third-year MFA candidate in printmaking. Printmaking is an incredibly process-based medium. The processes dictate my studio practice and my final works. They allow me to document the degradation of my metal plate. The etchings on my plate start to become muscle filaments. Muscle filaments get stronger with repetition. They improve, but there's a fine line between repetition to improvement and repetition to destruction. To mix my palette, I'm using warm and cool reds, as well as colors like burnt sienna and cerulean blue. The muscular and bodily nature of my prints is achieved using a climbing rope from my CrossFit gym and a process called sugar lift. My mental and physical strength have been tied together. Climbing the rope was one of the first obstacles I overcame. In order to get the image of the rope onto the plate, I'm using a process called sugar lift. To make a sugar lift print, you must first apply sugar in some form to the plate. I'm using molasses to paint the rope and pushing the rope onto the plate. Then I must cook the molasses onto the plate using the hot plate. This caramelizes it and sticks it to the plate so that it can withstand the next steps in the process. Then a ground must be applied to the plate. I'm using hard ground, which in our shop is a mixture of asphaltum, beeswax, and turpentine. When cooked on the hot plate, the turpentine evaporates, leaving the tarry and waxy coating that serves as a resist for the acid. After the ground is cool, the plate must be soaked in water. This allows the ground to come off of the plate where the sugar was applied, leaving a positive image of where the sugar was on the plate. The zinc plate is etched in copper sulfate. The copper sulfate reacts to the zinc to create copper and zinc sulfate. The copper comes off as a byproduct. The etching process is a physical illustration of the degradation process I'm exploring in my work. I'm printing my plates as viscosity prints. Viscosity printing is a method to get more than one color on one plate in one print at one time. This is done by using different layers of inks, each with different viscosities or thicknesses achieved by differing levels of oil. After the various etching processes and the mixing of the inks, my final print is pulled. I will ink and pull multiple identical prints from this plate. This will form my edition. The edition for this piece is small because it is very difficult to achieve identical prints using viscosity printing. The final display of this piece that I'm working on will consist of prints at multiple stages during the etching process. These are called state proofs. The collection of proofs will enable me to best showcase the degradation process I'm trying to highlight.
Over the last year, my work has expanded into a hybrid practice consisting of paintings and experimental videos. All of my newest paintings that you see here in my studio are the result of harvesting image stills from manipulated experimental videos. Creating videos has allowed me to enter a new conversation with my imagery. Instead of dominating the canvas with paint, I first have a dialogue with the video. The resulting paintings are surreal, have a sense of movement and time that addresses the obsessive cultural programming of the female psyche. There is a circuit between my painting and video practice. I approach creating video as I would a painter. I consider formal painting elements such as composition and color when working with video. By understanding how narrative moves in time, I am able to capture a similar effect within my paintings by harvesting compelling moments from a moving image. There's a dialogue between artistic intuition of using the paint body and the technical automation of video that blurs the virtual and the real, which can create dynamic images that can adhere well to the seductive surface of a canvas. Video can be used as an image processing medium to not only reinvent how we see painting, but also to be used independently. Art making, including painting, should be mediated to challenge the status quo, and using video as a perceptual prosthetic is a clear and strategic way to do exactly that.
Good evening. So lovely you could come for a chat. My name is Patrick Price, and I'm a third-year MFA candidate with a concentration in sculpture. What I've been working on over the past couple of years in the program has changed in a lot of ways, but in others remains the same. The methods I employ to make work and the way that work connects to these ideas has been evolving. I think part of this evolution stems from finishing a particular object, seeing what's working in the piece, and recognizing what might still need some more resolution. An example of this could be the sculpture I've been calling Fragment, which was shown in the Glass Box Gallery at the beginning of the semester. Fragment is about identity and and the conflict between the internal and external dimensions of the ideas we hold about self. We also see that there are specific decisions about material and surface that will inform the viewer and shape interpretation. Whatever my intentions may have been in making these decisions, everyone who participates in decoding or deciphering the work brings their own experiences and their own personal cultural histories into that process. I find that fascinating. The project I'm working on now, which I'm calling The Veil, developed from some of the questions that came about from the fragment sculpture, specifically about the relationships between the formation of self-identity and the socioeconomic, political, and geographic preconditions. I usually start with what I call the ideation stage. This is often provoked by questions that emerge from the making of or the discussions that follow the completion of a previous project. I discovered a metaphor that was popular in the 18th century called the Veil of Isis. Isis was nature personified, and it was through scientific investigation that one might lift the veil and glimpse some of the secrets of natural law. In a way, this process is one of the ideas I find myself returning to in my work. The idea of how we find and define ourselves in this world, and further, where the agency for that lies. This then initiates the design and testing stage. With some of the formal design elements in place, I now visualize the final materials, scale, and finish of the work. In making these assessments, I will then test the best options and make a selection. As physicists continue to find a theory that reconciles the contradictions of quantum physics and general relativity, the ancient words of Heraclitus continues to ring true. Nature loves to hide. I think that in many ways, we're still searching for these secrets. And despite everything we have learned, the true nature of reality continues to elude us. Well, this has been brief but fun. I look forward to continuing our chat here momentarily. Cheers!